こちらは Konami カスタマーサポートです。何かお手伝いできることはありますか？
Hey Konami, this is Report. Do you have the support?
すみません。
I need at least 8 new Dark Scorpions, cranked and stupid, ready to kill pronto. If they're not here in the next Duelist pack, I'm leaving an unfavorable review on your upcoming Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days Collection video game on my backlog.com. Your turn, Konami. Huh, they must have bricked. For this video, I've saved what I deemed the most unexpected or outrageous support of 2023, starting with Melodious of all things. Back in my archetype archive on them, I somehow managed to completely miss the basic observation that this Arc 5 deck based around special summoning somehow never got pendulums. So as if to remind me of my failures and make up for their own, the first two cards Melodious received were the Pendulum monsters, Refrain the Melodious Songstress, and Couplet the same thing. Their pendulum effects are pretty good. Refrain offers attack boosting and graveyard setup, which is more often used as a combo extender given the condition. Couplet only searches 2 pieces of back row based on the naming scheme, but one of them is their new fusion spell, which can use monsters in the pendulum zone as materials, so that's hardly a downside. This is especially the case since their monster effects basically make them free fusion materials while in the back row, being able to place themselves back in there upon a fusion summon, letting you reuse them for any purpose afterwards. On top of this, they also have individual monster effects, Refrain being a basic searcher and a great target for first move and solo, and Couplet being the ideal monster for that search due to her special summon effect. These two are fantastic combo pieces that kickstart so many plays and finally make the deck feel like it has some vocals accompanying the instrumental. The aforementioned new fusion spell is Melodious Concerto. As previously pointed out, it can use monsters from the pendulum zone as material, but it also summons any fairy fusion, so I guess you could theoretically use this to summon God, how do Nouvelle's players deal with this shit? It also recycles itself really easily while giving you draw power, so it can be good discard fodder as you can search it again if necessary. Not much else to add here, it's a good fusion spell and goes right along Ostinato. The monster you'll most likely be summoning first with either of those, or Soprano, is Batcha, the Melodious Maestro. It's a simple summoning condition and insane extender effect, putting literally any Melodious monster from your deck onto the field, as well as maintaining field presence if it's used as material by bringing one back from the graveyard. This gives so much utility to previously mediocre monsters such as Tam Tam, who becomes an easy enabler for repeated fusions, especially with Substitute, or the 2 main deck maestros who can now act as combo pieces or fusion materials. The latter is useful if you would rather Baka stay on the field to prevent negation, which is a great effect of its own, but the extension you get from her floating is just as, if not even more important. Thanks to this card, Melodious are now able to end on a 6 monster board without using their normal summon, while playing through negates and interruptions, and we're somehow still not done. Their biggest fusion monster so far is the new level 8, Flowering Etoile, the Melodious Grand Core. Her summoning condition is a bit costly for a deck that doesn't have a Miracle Fusion, but she makes up for it with basically everything else. The mass non-target bounce quick effect is incredible, being able to get rid of any and all problem cards on the spot, or even dodging a bunch of removal including Nibiru. If the opponent happens to get rid of it, she can easily summon back one of your dozen playmakers and start your combos back up without much trouble. Etoile is the win condition the deck desperately needed for so long, as they no longer have to solely rely on Bloom Diva's destruction effect to have any amount of control over the field. Properly timing the bounce can severely impact the opponent's plays, especially if Baka is also there to stop any negation, and unless they manage to swing in while your Melodious were tap dancing away from the field, you're most likely in OTK range next turn. And honestly, the materials aren't even that big of a deal, because the deck has such a comical amount of field presence now that you're probably not even gonna feel the summoning condition. I know I'm just pointing out the obvious at this point, but not much else I can do when a card is simply good and has the color scheme of a warm hug. Well, Melodious is finally complete, I guess. The main problem with the deck was addressed in a very practical manner, turning them into a fun and competent control deck with a ton of protection. Sure, they're not gonna tear up the meta or anything, they still only have one boss monster that's actually a threat to the opponent's field, but they're plenty consistent at summoning it and have a very sturdy monster lineup to back it up. I also gotta admit I kind of undermined Schuberta's ability back in the Archetype archive, as a quick triple graveyard banish can actually be pretty solid disruption, so yeah, their current fusions can be pretty nasty. With some crazy field building potential, their access to generic extra deck monsters is also much better, giving them plenty of versatility as well. They were honestly never a hard deck to make playable with a handful of support, so I'm glad what they got is decently strong and fun to mess around with. It's music to my ears. So, what's up next? Exactly. Watt Tuna is a Watt Tuner in one of the only TCG puns triumphant over the OCG original. It's also a card that needs to cram a lot of text into its effect because this is a battle phase centric archetype from 2010. However, what's going on here is pretty interesting. It summons itself when you damage the opponent, which is something you should ideally be doing with Watts, and upon attacking with it, you can use it to synchro summon, including monsters from the hand, and put out one of the extra deck Watts in the middle of the battle phase. It's a very roundabout way of increasing damage output and building the field, but it is straightforward and in line with the archetype's playstyle. Dealing damage with Watt Cobra is essentially a free tuna, which is one of the deck's most powerful plays, as sad as that is. Watts are still very slow for today's standards, so if they wanted them to do the same thing they always did, it makes sense to give them something that just speeds up the whole process. So on that topic, here's their new synchro, Watt Kyuki. This thing solely exists for you to summon it during the battle phase, put out some damage, and then make another Watt synchro to hopefully finish off the opponent, because there is not much else you can do afterwards. Don't get me wrong, it's cool that it can shuffle a material from the graveyard and it doesn't even care about the levels, so making Hydra or Chimera is pretty simple. The thing is, that's all it does. The deck's current iteration plays like an OTK, but it still needs to run a bunch of outside cards to even hope to get into that range. When an archetype based around attacking gets a wave of modern support, I expect that support to make it so that I don't have to run Kashteras or search Luminous fucking Spark with left arm offering to do a reasonable amount of damage. Hand ripping with Chimera is always fun, but if one discard is all that your turn culminates in, it's hardly enough to matter. Next up we have Watt Kingdom. I don't know if the reason this wasn't made into a field spell was because they thought all the fans of Watt Castle would cause a Wattricide if it got replaced, or if they actually do think Luminous Spark is a central playmaker for the deck, and I don't know which is worse. The stun effect is neat. You can reasonably get 3 Watts onto the field along with this card, leaving the opponent exactly 1 column for their own summon effects. This can definitely slow down a decent number of modern archetypes, although it's unlikely to be anything resembling a win condition, but it is your best first turn play. The swarm effect is also good, because this deck only functions by having access to very specific monsters, which Kingdom fetches for you on command, if you at least had 1 Watt in the first place. Also, if this gave your Watts a mere 400 attack boost, it would let you put exactly 8000 damage on board along with Cobra and not have to compromise your build with a ton of outside support. But it doesn't do that, so you either need to settle on a janky stun build or an embarrassing OTK variant. So yeah, it's good with a few question marks. I guess I should also bring up the TCG exclusive Watt Psychic Fighting Porter. It's searchable and lets you put 2 Watt Hoppers on the field. It's not gonna happen, but it could happen. This deck is in such a funny position right now. The passage of time has not been kind to the Watt playstyle, so their current game plan revolves around scrambling to get as many of these tiny direct attackers onto the field, while hoping your few stun options prevent the opponent from preventing that. There's still good stuff in here. I mean, Giraffe is a beast like always, and the deck can afford to run a Kaiju or a Sprite Engine, but there's still not much to do with these cards and the novelty wears off quickly. I would love a more expanded support wave for Watts that gives them more field presence and actually makes use of all their little gimmicks, but I'm afraid they're gonna remain in this underwhelming linear form for quite a while. Anyway, here's some more goddamn ice barriers. I don't get it, man. The story's over, they hit a structure deck, and the fish. I think these guys persevering for so long is the only legitimate argument against global warming being real. Mirror Magic Master of the Ice Barrier is a big fat synchro enabler. It's a level 2 tuner that can spawn 3 tokens and modify its level based on that, and it gives you searching and banish recycling in the graveyard. Revealer easily summons it turns Hexa Spirit into a searcher, and do I need to explain why this is a good combo piece? It makes 3 goddamn tokens which you can proceed to use for any water synchros you want at the cost of 1 measly tribute, which could end up being a benefit based on its floating effect. If you have a Coral Dragon up, you can make Archetyst with it and 3 tokens, which gives you 4 draws and is really easy to make with Speaker in the graveyard. It's not as cool as that other Ice Barrier card that summons tokens, but we can't all be royals. Again, the floating effect is also incredibly versatile, making the card good discard fodder and giving you more consistency and recovery. How does it do all that?
It's magic!
Next up is Georgius, or Gorgeous if you will, Swordsman of the Ice Barrier, which is very easy to put on the field, has an extremely handy extension effect, and an actually useful stun ability which was sorely lacking from the archetype's last wave of support. Locking down graveyard effects is generally very strong regardless of the format, but in case you don't need him doing that, he's also a level 6 tuner. He works great with all the new tokens going around, making for a bunch of synchro plays, Trishula being a fun one to focus on due to the high level. His summon effect also covers a pretty wide range of monsters, including
No, that can't be right. No, tribute.
Yes, a tribute is needed.
It's another simple but well-rounded monster that perfectly fits the deck's modern style. Between trying to hold the seal on those 3 totally hardcore ice dragons, I guess the Ice Barrier tribe forgot about their dad who was slumped over the fridge while the cataclysm was going on. Well, now he finally woke up and he's out to get his Smirnoff ice. Lancia, dragonic ancestor of the Ice Spirit Mountain, isn't so much a monster as it is a deck box. Twice per turn, in response to the opponent's special summons, it can special summon any Ice Barrier from anywhere besides the Banish Zone, sorry I meant the Banishment, while changing the opponent's monsters to defense so that they don't run over your stun cards, and it synchro summons an Ice Barrier monster from the extra deck on floating. It's also a level 10, making it a super easy summon with Ice Jade Ron Aegirine, which sets up your graveyard while doing so. The summon response effect is such a good ability for this deck that it makes me wonder why they never had one before. It's the perfect turn 1 card because it lets you check what the opponent is playing before deciding what floodgate to hit them with. We're talking about an archetype that can turn off monster effects, graveyard activations, he has a Macrocosmos for back row, an anti-spell fragrance, and my good friend Roy McKnight. And it does this twice per turn. Not to mention, if the opponent somehow does get rid of it, they're in for a chilling surprise. I'm not even mad about them making up a whole new dragon to give Ice Barriers another boss monster, because this is such an imaginative yet completely fitting effect for the archetype without coming off like overkill. Trishul is the one you overkill people with, and that's fine, because that's what it's supposed to do. There's also the new non-Ice Barrier Bryonak. It's bad. I know it's just a promo card, but come on, the guy already got the errata, this is just dragging his name through the mud. It's clearly supposed to be similar to the Fusion Trishula, so I don't know, maybe we're getting an Xyz Gungnir somewhere down the line. Or a Pendulum DeLorean! Their last new card is the Continuous Trap, Frozen Domain leading to the Ice Barrier. Making all your Ice Barrier monster effects spell speed 4 is pretty awesome, and the non-targeting spin can be great interruption if you time it right. Now, the maintenance cost kinda makes the card a one-turn deal, as you don't tend to run more than 3 Ice Barrier synchros, so summoning one will pop the card during your end phase. It's still a good amount of time for it to stay up, especially with it being searchable, so this is a neat one-off by preference. I would call this the better Ice Barrier support wave, but that would be a bit disingenuous, seeing how the reason for it being so good is the synergy with the structure deck one. The playstyle that was introduced with those cards was fleshed out much further with their 2 new main deck monsters, but also made a bit more interesting with Lancia, giving the deck a lot of varied, reactive potential. Their inclusion in Terminal World was a surprise, but it was definitely a spirited effort to make something even cooler out of the archetype, so I can't be too mad about it. As long as this is the last one for a while. And now for the quickies. Dragon Magia Master is the long overdue retrain of Dragon Master Knight. In the attempt to make the sickest nostalgia bait in history that would cause even the most jaded Duel Monsters fan to hyperventilate hard enough to power a small country, Konami paradoxically made it not require a ritual spellcaster or warrior as the second fusion material. You can summon this by fusing 3 blue eyes with a blue eyes ritual monster. And that just kinda annoys me so hard that I never want to think about this card again. IAS is a cute monster thematically, but it's not really alien support, like, at all. Red Dragon Archfiend got an entire structure deck. Good for him, but I'm not covering any Signer Dragon shit anymore that I didn't review as a whole archetype. This video did not go deep enough to warrant that kind of re-evaluation. I'm glad we got some human support in it though, I feel really represented. Jokes aside, this card is awesome and I wish they would do more stuff like this. And lastly, there's... Doggy?
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, Princess?